I think if we were to look at lessons that can easily be transferred, I think one important lesson is, in order to reduce poverty, you need to know who the poor are. So one of the big things that happened in the early 2000s is that China started building up a database of, I think, close to 150,000 villages, which they determined to be, poverty-stricken villages and counties. And then policy was directed to help those particular places. Over time, it became increasingly clear that poverty is no longer a place-related affliction, but has a lot to do with your personal household characteristics. And so from monitoring places, you had to move to monitoring households. So that's an important part. I think China clearly demonstrates that economic growth, and in particular the kind of economic growth that China was able to generate, is the key contributor to poverty reduction. In the first 3 decades, by far the largest contribution to poverty reduction came from economic growth, not from any particularly targeted social policies. It's only in the last decade, and particularly after 2013, that we find that policy really tries to go to the last mile. And I think a final thing that China demonstrates is that this is a multidimensional phenomenon.
The environment, Martin. So China wants to see peak emissions by 2030, wants to achieve carbon neutrality sometime before 2060. How important do you think the environment, the green economy, will factor into the 14th five-year plan in terms of, I guess, laying the foundation for China to achieve the targets that it wants to achieve in 2030 before 2060?
And we see a huge opportunity for China, building on the announcements that President Xi made at the UN General Assembly, to really accelerate the decoupling of its economic growth from its environmental footprint. The technologies are there. It's a question of changing the incentives, the relative prices, and giving clear signals from the government that this time it's serious, and accelerating that process. I hope it plays a crucial role. I hope it plays a central role, because to get to net zero emissions by 2060, you really have to start now. It looks like it's still 40 years from here, but a simple example to illustrate: if you build a new coal-fired power plant today, that plant will still be running by 2060. They tend to have an asset life of 40 years. So unless you plan to phase them out now, it's going to be very hard for you to reach net zero by 2060. So I think that's just to illustrate how important this shift potentially is. A lot of people have been arguing, us included, that in addition to a relative target of emissions to GDP, so China has said we will emit proportionally less and less for the additional marginal unit of GDP, China should actually adopt an absolute emissions target, because if you think about peaking emissions before 2030, that's an absolute emissions target. If you were to translate that into the 14th five-year plan, you could have an absolute target beyond which emissions shouldn't grow by the end of the 14th five-year plan, and that would create the trajectory for actually peaking emissions before 2030. So the 14th five-year plan could be a very important juncture at which China signals that what its leaders have announced recently is going to be transformed into concrete actions on the ground. I think the agenda for the 21st century is that you can get green while you're getting rich. You don't have to wait until you're rich before you can get green. And that's a signal that China could send, which would, I think, be very important and well received.